Welcome to My Favorite CX, a podcast that celebrates exceptional customer experiences. To listen to today's, please choose from one of the following options.
Welcome to My Favorite Customer Experience. I'm Chris Holt here in the UK, and I'm joined by Maring Eberlein from M. Francis Consulting. Maring, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Maring, you're a self-professed support content lover using user-centric experiences and creating support content best practices that started from life as a support agent. I read that you think and care about support content far more than you probably should do. And as someone that spends far too much time thinking about ideas and things in my niche, I can completely understand that one.
It's important. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what it is you do.
Yeah. So I right now I'm kind of in the process of, I was looking for consistency, wanted something full time, and that's just not the market right now. Thank you, AI, for the first. We'll just go ahead and get that out of the way. And I am kind of like in the process of going back into client work. But in the last year, my primary focus, I wrote and published a course in partnership with the UX Content Collective about support content. They were, I've always been interested in it as a support agent and later managing a support team. But they were getting UX writers, right? Because like help center content, who does that? No one really knows. It just kind of depends on where you are. And so they were getting a lot of people. They have a fabulous certification in UX writing. And I'm a little biased now, but I did that certification when I was in the process of transitioning into content full time, not knowing I would work with them later. And they train UX writers, content designers, and they were getting a lot of people coming back who were certified and working in the field, and requests from product teams like, hey, you're going to do the UX copy for this as well as the help center articles for this new feature, whatever. And they had students who were like, well, I don't know how that's different. Like, I don't know how to do that. They're reaching out to UXCC to be like, hey, do you have any resources for this? And they didn't. And so they're putting out feelers. And at the time, I was very deep into doing some subcontracting work with a Zendesk partner. So I was doing support content specifically in the Zendesk guide. Customers who were getting Zendesk either for the first time or looking to zhuzh it up a little bit. And maybe it was their first time with access to a CMS. That was usually the case. And they're just like, this, whatever we have isn't working. Realizing the need for some kind of self-serve content. And so I would come in and do that, whatever that meant for them. So I'd had a lot of experience. It's like I like to kind of track how I got here is like how I kind of developed what I do and how I got into writing the course too, because, I started working with content. I was working on, I think even before I was managing the team, it was just like, so I worked in the employment-based immigration space. And there's a lot of parts of that process where like as support agents, there's in the US, at least for US inbound, I don't know if this is universal, but UPL, the unauthorized practice of law. So we had to be very careful about what we could say to users, because most of the time, half of our chats and calls were like, hey, what's the status? What's going on with my case? What's going on? Because it's a very high stress thing for our users.
Yep.
And we wanted to give information, but we had to be careful about what we could and couldn't say. And there's this very like line of, general legal information versus legal advice, whatever that was. And especially for parts of the green card process, if it's employment based, there's a lot of parts of that process that users like the foreign national employees, they are not involved. They can't be involved legally. They can't really know anything that's going on. But like it was helpful to give them general information. And we'd be sending these, like we had email macros and stuff that we would send, but they'd be these long emails. I'm like, this isn't like, how do we not have a resource that we can just point them to and say, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what we kind of can and can't tell you, but you can get more information from here. Because if we didn't tell them, or if the attorneys didn't tell them that, like there's so many forums with bad information out there. Right? Like you'd rather it come from us.
And that's only getting worse, isn't it? You thanked AI at the start, but AI is dredging all kinds of information from the internet, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's good information.
Yeah, this was like 6 or 7 years ago at least. So yeah, at the time it was forums, at least it was coming from real people, whether they were giving good advice or no advice. But like hopefully they're talking about real experiences at least. Where yeah, with AI, it's like you Google it, and whether you want to use AI or not, there's an AI summary that pops up on Google now that's who knows how accurate that is. Most of the time, I think it's not bad, but still, and it's not great. So from my perspective, as well as like the attorneys and everything, it's like there was this line, but it's like there's got to be a way we can give information to people. And usually they were so grateful. And then from a support agent perspective, I wasn't stuck in a chat for an hour, like answering every little question that they had, because most of the time it was just questions, right, that kind of come from insecurity. Sometimes, it's like they just want confirmation that they did the thing right, or that like what's happening is normal. That was a lot of what we were dealing with. I mean, immigration is a very personal, emotional thing. And so a lot of times, like we found, once I was able to kind of like, it took forever. I think it took, gosh, I remember I did a talk at Support Driven Expo a year and a half, not this year's, but last year's, where it was literally how I got into this content stuff, is that a UX designer we were launching a new version of the app, we were working on stuff, whatever, and then we drafted some things with this UX designer, and then 2 years later, like nothing happened. And then I had this Word doc of all these really amazing resources, organized, whatever. And then 2 years later, the COO was like, "We need self-serve, right? Like we need self-serve. Who can do that? What is that? We need to start doing this." And I'm over here like, I've had this drafted for 2 years, so and then so that was the thing that got it actually published and over that line. And I know, especially from a support perspective, there's a lot of people who go through things like that, where it's like, how do you get approval? You need to get buy-in from leadership, all these things. Not relevant, really. But anyway, once we got the green light from our COO to like actually do the thing, I'm like, well, I want to do it right. And so I was Googling around trying to figure things out, and it's just kind of further confirmation that there's really not a specific like best way of doing things. Like KCS is really popular in support spaces, which I think is amazing for internal knowledge management. And I think it also provides an incredible framework for maintaining, updating, that kind of stuff. But not all of it works for me. Like I don't necessarily agree with some of their structure stuff when it comes to like general end user facing content. So I'm like, I was finding all these things and kind of just cobbling together, like I had done the UX writing certification, because when I quit my job, I was that support manager with like 18 hats and just fully burnt out, and knew I needed something different. And so, I was like, you know what, I really like this content stuff. Like I want to commit to it. And I was already helping our product teams with different like in product copy. There was no one at my company doing any kind of content outside of marketing. So I was kind of the go-to person for notifications overhaul and tooltips, but also trying to get content out there for my team.
And you'll find, I guess, people have all kinds of random bits of knowledge everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got some in agents' heads, you've got some on Post-it notes, you've got some in documents, some on SharePoint. And from what you're talking about, it's not just serving it for the internal need, it's making sure it's surfaced in a way that's accessible and useful to customers as well.
So I think that's kind of my primary focus. When I was managing our team, I actually, when it comes to internal knowledge, how many of us as support people have come across like the way that we got ours under control? I think we realized there was a new hire who sent something to someone and it wasn't quite right. And we're like, where did you? And they're like, well, it came from the team macros. And we're like, what is the team macros? And it's apparently there was one person who was like passing around copies of this OneNote, a Microsoft OneNote. And it was kind of like there were different iterations of it. And some people had different versions because they weren't like sharing the one thing. They were just sharing a copy. And so we looked at it and we're like, okay, half the team, and it turned out like half the team was using some version of this. And we're like, well, what if we just make one that is so I think, yeah, we made one that was actually shared with the team, and it became, honestly, like, I think this is my biggest thing, is like, do what you can with what you have, because it actually became an incredible resource for our team for a while. It was before we were on Zendesk and had access to any kind of CMS. So we were pretty much just using OneDrive, right? Like we're all familiar with that. But with OneDrive, like you have to click into different documents. Word docs get so long and just like it's hard to navigate. So the OneNote was really helpful because you can share those. They take a million years to load, which is kind of annoying. But we had it where like only like me, our director, and like a few other like seniors had access to editing it. And we used the tabs. It was kind of just like a rudimentary CMS for us, where we had, because you can do the tabs and sections. And so we kind of had that for like, chat blurbs, like things that
you make it, I guess, as usable as possible in the resource you've got. And I think what's interesting there as well is you then want to make it available to customers. I'm seeing it with customers at the moment where they're like, customers say things different to how we call them. So when they're trialing like Copilot, that kind of thing, over the top of this knowledge, they're like, it's not triggering what we expect. And it's like, you've got to almost hone your verbiage to the verbiage of, of your customer, not your business.
Yeah, that's always a challenge. So to clarify, the OneNote I was talking about was just an internal source for the team.
Yep.
And I have not been on a team since Copilot's been a thing. I've been on my own now since early of 2022. So wait, 21? Oh my God, I don't know. I think it was 2022 that I kind of started this journey. So I haven't actually had to work with a ton of those tools and like the AI agents, right? Like the agentic AI that helps you find and answer tickets, that kind of stuff. Like, honestly, I feel a little bit lucky that I haven't had to, I wasn't an agent or that I wasn't a manager of a team with all of this happening. I think in a lot of ways, I somehow got out of everything at a good time, which I hate saying because I know so many people are dealing with it. But I will say, in my experience, so the OneNote I can say like is a good example of like when we got it organized into tabs, right? Like that is a good way of browsing. I'm someone where like I don't love to use the search function. Like there is a search function. Eventually we transitioned once we migrated to Zendesk in 2019. And I kind of led that. And then after we got, all the functions going, we then like invested our time into the guide, and we were using that internally because we had some kind of strict things about publishing content to end users. So we just used the guide for internal purposes only. And we were, again, like we mimicked a lot of what we were doing in that OneNote because there's a lot to be said for structured content. And this is where, like, when it comes to, so my primary focus now has been content for end users. However, I'm always interested in what agents are using because ultimately, like you said, we want to use the language of our users. We also want to know what information they've been given. So whenever I've worked on new projects with clients, because see, the last big one that I did, they had a ton of internal stuff, not a lot of end user. So I was mostly brought in for the end user, but what I was able to kind of over time show, like, okay, let's get the content optimized for end users, and then your agents can use that, and you can link to that. The amount of times, like, like my favorite thing, what talks to people, one-touch tickets, right? Like, how often can we have a one-touch ticket? Because a lot of times you'll get an email, a chat, whatever, with like a quick question, and I know that like, okay, they're asking, oh, this is like one of the early stages of the questionnaire process, or they're just logging into their account and they have a case open. I can, as an agent, I can look and I see that. I know that if not right now, eventually they're going to have questions about filling out the questionnaire, about doing this thing. There's always questions about documents and things like that. So I answer their question about login or the first parts of the questionnaire. But before I even do that, I say, like, hey, so-and-so, thanks for contacting us. Here's the answer to your question. If you have any further questions, here's a link to further information about this. And maybe it's a resource that's all about like, getting started with our company, whatever that is. And 9 times out of 10, I feel like that's when you do they say thank you and it reopens, but then like that's it. And not only have you answered their question and apparently gone above and beyond, but you're secretly avoiding them reaching back out to you.
Yeah, you're avoiding future contacts and future costs,
right?
ultimately.
Because a lot of users, I mean, especially now, like as human beings, like we kind of have this expectation of just being able to find what we need and do what we need. I mean, one of my favorite things when I was researching for the course when we were doing Unit 1, it's like, okay, how did we get here? And there's I discovered the concept of the fourth industrial revolution and how we're in this space of like, yes, AI is part of it, but like it's an economic idea where human beings, like we're used to the Internet of Things is part of that, where like I can control my air conditioner from my smartphone. When you said you're about to go to Copenhagen, you forget to lock your door when at home, like, oh, let me just lock that up or turn my AC down or whatever that is, and you can do it in a second. So if I'm having trouble with this platform or this product, I just want to find the answer quickly. I don't want to have to talk to someone. Like, especially larger companies have trained us as consumers, like, I just immediately assume that if I have to call or chat, it's going to be with a robot, or I'm going to have to be on hold for however long, or I'm going to have to talk to someone in another country who's like clearly not very well trained on my questions, like whatever it is. I don't really want to contact support, even if it is, there's some companies who've built up a reputation where they're like, yes, contact us and we've proven to you that we will give you good support. But the overarching assumption, I think, as consumers is that if you contact support, it's probably not going to be a great experience, or there's a really high chance that it's going to be a crappy experience.
Yep.
And
I think that's true for most consumers now, of like, it doesn't matter what the method is. If it's self-serve, that's fine as long as I can get my issue resolved. I don't mind talking to a bot. It's if I have to talk to a bot and I can't get it, or I have to go through a website, and then I still have to speak to an agent. I think you're right. Companies have lowered the bar in terms of what we expect. Good customer service, and that's why we have this podcast, really, is hard to find sometimes.
yeah, and that's where, like, when you can do it well, you've got promoters forever, right? Like, people are always pleasantly surprised at the very bare minimum. It's sometimes it's really rewarding when you do something that for you is very easy and simple, but to that person, they thought they'd be spending hours that day dealing with this, and you were able to just resolve it right there. Like, that means so much to them. And so for organizations that are recognizing the value of those experiences, it's great. Another model I love talking about is the HubSpot. I think it's HubSpot. Shoot. I think it's HubSpot. It might be a different company. GitHub. I always get GitHub and HubSpot turned around. I think it's HubSpot. Either way, there's the concept of the sales flywheel instead of the sales funnel, because, right, like the sales process, they're always like, well, acquisition, blah, 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 all these things, marketing, and then it just ends once they're acquired. And it's like, no.
No, it never stops.
So much more that has to happen. And I think all of us kind of like, it seems like no one talks about it, but I feel like we all know that recurring revenue is always easier won, and frankly makes up more of the business, I think, than new revenue most of the time. It obviously depends on the industry and all those things.
And it's 6 times more significant or more effort to acquire.
Yeah. So
as well.
So the concept of the sales flywheel is that we're constantly we're investing in our existing customers, and those become your promoters. I know, like, just when I have a good experience, that I'm going to stick with them. And if people ask me for something related to it, I'm going to recommend it. Also, like, if I'm between two competitors, and maybe this is just me and my background, but like, and this is something that there's been research, like a very unofficial research on this too, that if I'm between two products, I'll take a look and poke around a help center and see, like, okay, are they willing to invest in the support process? Are they investing in their existing customers? Can I easily figure this out on my own or not? And so if there's one, like, they do similar things, but one has like a really solid help center that I can see as a prospect without having to buy in, and the other, like, there's nothing, or it's really bad, I'm not gonna look at that. Salesforce is a really good example. So this is where, for those like trying to make an argument for investing in support content on their team, there's a YouTube video that I linked in the course, and they're it's a team at Salesforce. I think it's their team that worked on their help center stuff or something related to that. But they have like the Salesforce Trailhead where you can learn Salesforce on your own, which is great. But they also have a really robust support center with technical documentation. I mean, Salesforce is a very technical product. And they did a survey when they were poking around. One of the people in the video, she had said, like, I just went around, and there's a great graph that she showed where it was like, to salespeople, at what point in the process do you send prospects to the help center? Or like what percentage of the time, or like how often do you, whatever it was. And it was something like 80% of salespeople, especially toward the end, like getting toward the end of that sales process, they sent them to the help center. And I think, as they should, right? Salespeople their profession, their expertise is in the sale, and they know what they need to know about, like, the pricing, whatever that is. but they don't have all of the technical know-how of everything. And I don't think that they should. That's not the primary purpose of their job, is to know all the technical ins and outs. And yet most of us coming from support, a lot of us, we get those questions from new users and new clients where they're like, oh, well, the salesperson said this one thing. Why isn't it doing that? Why isn't it here? And maybe if salespeople were better trained, like if there was reliable support content that they could point prospects to, they wouldn't have to say things and kind of like, I think a lot of times it comes right from speaking on the fly and just trying to like close the deal. It's usually well intentioned, or like they genuinely thought it did the thing, but they don't know, because again, their expertise is the sales process, not necessarily the ins and outs of the product itself. So how great when you have reliable support documentation where they can say, like, that's a great question. Let's take a look at our support docs or check out our help center. There's a lot of, like, our team has put a lot of time and effort into this, and like it can definitely feed into the sales process. There's an argument to be made there. And I'm like, the screenshot's in my course.
We'll put a link to that
I can try to find
after
it.
the show. So what we'll do is we'll take a slight break, and then we'll come back and we'll ask you about one of those favorite customer experiences.
Your call is important to us. Please hold, and you will be connected to your next favorite customer experience shortly.
Welcome back to my favorite customer experience. Before the break, we were talking about how sometimes the best experiences are the ones that you expect are going to be high effort, and actually they're pleasantly surprising. Maring, I think you've got one of those with your student loan.
Yeah. So especially having gone to college in the United States, student loans, they're going to follow you forever. Mine, luckily, I've had better loan providers, so I haven't had some of the nightmares that others have. But earlier this year, my student loan changed providers. I wasn't expecting it. I think I was, what was I doing? I was working on something not with taxes. Maybe it was that early this year. I am someone who likes to put things off, especially when it's not fun to deal with, right? We tend to do that. And I learned a long time ago with my loans, like, it's probably not the best for my credit, but I learned, like, oh, they just kind of keep charging interest. It's not the best thing. But I've always been someone where I try to pay like a little more, whatever. So like I kind of got in the habit where I had it automatically set up, but then if I would go in manually, I knew it wasn't the end of the world if I didn't deal with it right away. So obviously I put it off for a while. And also like during COVID, they paused student loan payments for quite some time. So I think so the automatic payments turned off and I just wasn't dealing with it. And I think I was putting together tax documents and I logged into my account for the first time in who knows how long. And it was weird. It looked like it had been paid for. It turned out I got an email like a week later that's like, oh no, you just changed providers. Or we've like moved this to another provider. So I knew I needed to deal with it because the suspension on making payments was not in effect anymore. But I continued to put it off. And then I think I was putting off it was several months and I just like wasn't dealing with it, which not the best thing to do. And I get a phone call from it and I think it had, sometimes it tells you caller ID. For whatever reason, I picked up the call and I was like, I got to deal with this. And they're like, hey, we've been emailing you, you got to make a payment on your loans. Like you're going to go into default soon. And I was like, oh shoot. Yeah, I've been meaning to deal with this. I just haven't. And I kind of expected to get reprimanded or like some kind of, it's a new loan provider. And I know that there's nightmares out there. My previous loan provider, it was pretty laid back. It was easy enough to work with. And now it's this new one. I was like, oh no, I think this is this year. So Trump administration, have they gotten rid of the good loan providers? Is this one going to be one of those nightmares? I just had this assumption that it was going to be really bad. And I think that's part of why I wasn't dealing with it. It's like, well, I'll deal with it when the time comes. But no, the woman on the phone was lovely. She had introduced herself. She's just like, yeah, we just need to, and it was, it wasn't necessarily, it was like, I'm assuming it was some form of proactive support where they're like, before people start really getting into trouble, they were probably just making calls to be like, hey, you got to pay us. Good reason to have agents do proactive calls. I don't know if this was an agent or however that works with the loan company, but I just hadn't dealt with it. And I honestly, like, I did have some questions. So I asked my questions, and she resent the email so I could get the login, and let me know too, because I've been subcontracting, and then my work has just gotten a little bit fuzzy lately because life has been lifing really hard for me, as it tends to do sometimes. And as a consultant, that's a blessing and a curse, because I've been able to kind of step away from work without too many repercussions, but at the same time, not making much money. So, and I kind of mentioned that. I was like, yeah, it's just been a hard year or so. And she's like, well, here's some, this is how you can apply for this repayment plan. I'll send you a link. Like, she was super helpful. And I had been dreading this thing, and it was fine. And not only was it fine, it was actually really helpful that I picked up the call and I was able to ask those questions, and she sent additional resources. And I did log in and make that payment, and I don't think I set up the automatic payments yet, so I got to get back on top of it. But it is really reassuring to know that, like, okay, this is not a scary loan shark student loan provider. Like, I'm going to be all right. And I know I'm very lucky for that, but yeah.
And I think if we think about that from a technology perspective as well, of like, let's assume it was a proactive campaign of some description, there will have been a thought within that company of, if we just let these customers, essentially former students, default, then it's not great for them. And when they call us, they're not going to be in the best of moods. You already said you've been putting it off, head in the sand slightly, which, we all do. I've seen an email today from my accountant about tax, and I'm like, after this long weekend, we will look at that. But, with the naturally as well, once you think something's going to be emotional or high effort, you're like, I don't want to do this. And actually, them reaching out to you, they've already looked at something in their customer flow, that flywheel of the journey that we were talking about before the break, of actually, if we get in contact, if we get in front of people ahead of time, then actually we can answer their questions, we can resolve it, and they're reassured. And it sounds like, from a situation where you just need to rip the Band-Aid off and get on with it, actually they've helped you out here, and then provided, by having, to the point we were talking about beforehand, by having good knowledge systems, by having good information, that agent was also able to reassure you and help you.
Yeah. And I mean, it's totally possible that they were making calls as more of a CYA process. Like, well, we warned you before the default. It's totally possible that was a thing, but I am really grateful that they put someone knowledgeable and helpful on the phone instead of a robocall, or someone who is not going to be as aware of how things work. So I feel very lucky in that way. Because it honestly, like, it could have been a really heightened and stressful situation. I was definitely very wary of picking up the call, but I knew, like, I need to deal with this. Maybe this is the best way to just, like, pick up the call and figure it out. So I'm really, it definitely goes that way. And I remember with my old company, we would do proactive calls to users, and half the time, like, we're leaving voicemails or whatever, but a lot of times people were so grateful to get the call, because we, U.S. inbound, we had H-1B cap season, and it's a lot of people who are coming out of college or trying to immigrate to the U.S., and they don't really understand the process yet, and they know they need to do things, and we're just trying to get them to log into the platform, complete your part of the questionnaire, your employer will take care of the rest. Because, we didn't want cases to get stuck, and so we would call and check on that. But at the same time, like, it was a great opportunity to make a positive contact. I mean, right, like, first impressions count a lot. And so it was actually really helpful, because we were able to set our company up as, like, we're not your typical law firm. And it wasn't a law firm, it was a tech platform. You can't sell legal services. It's separate. It's always separate. But, like, they always, I think a lot of people, attorneys are another industry, just like loan providers, where it's like, ooh, they're going to be very direct and not
the moment you see it, you're like, oh, well, my car was hit last year at some point, and I had a call flash up from a solicitor, and I'm like, and as far as I was concerned, it was months in the past, and the moment you see it, you look straight away, you're like, oh no, what have I done? What have I done? And actually, it wasn't. It was something about, they just wanted to clarify something because the insurer was disputing something with the other insurer and all that kind of stuff. But it's the moment you're in a situation which is highly emotional, having that level of reassurance, both when you were working with the immigration service and also with the student loan being the customer side, It's a really good reason to still do outbound. I mean, outbound, especially with robocalls and things, gets a really bad rap. But actually, when it's done properly, at the right part of the cycle, then it makes a lot of sense.
Hmm. Yeah, I think we have a lot of that where it's like people see it's like, okay, there's a new case. That means there's gonna be a lot of paperwork and I got to figure out, like, I got to find all my diplomas and get scans of that. And sometimes you have to get translations and they know that, but they don't know how that's going to work or whatever. And so when they get this call from someone or just a friendly voicemail that's just like, hey, we're just checking in, wanted to let you know, like, this is how the process works. This is what you need to do. Please feel free to give us a call. Here's how you can contact us. Here's where you can find some resources. I think that goes a long way. And especially later on when that process, when we know it's going to get stressful, because like with H-1B cap and this, it's different now. It's actually gotten a lot, one thing the U.S. government has done better in immigration in the last like 5 to 10 years is they made the cap process automated. It used to be when I started, like they had to have the entire case prepped and ready, and then you had to wait for, sometimes it was only like a month or so, but sometimes you're waiting for a very long time to find out if you've been selected or not. And especially early on in that process, it's like, that waiting for selection where you've had people calling and chatting every single day, like, what's the status? What's the status? But I think a lot of times when we were able to contact people proactively, it kind of set that tone of like, oh, you're going to let me know, and I know I can trust that. Or, I'm stressed, but I know I can contact you to feel better, which like you don't necessarily always want when it comes to like high busy seasons and high ticket volumes. But at the same time, like, it does matter because you want to, we all want a good CSAT, and those are really easy wins to help kind of boost that, because people are going to remember their first experience when things get dicey and complicated and difficult, because that is almost certainly going to happen for some percentage of your user population. That's I'm like, let me transition into like one of my arguments for that support content. It's like, a lot of times there's this assumption that, and I hear this from product teams especially, and the larger content strategy space where they want to put all of their effort and their resources into the product copy, which, to be clear, is so important. And it really is like that first line of defense, especially in tech. Like if you have good UX copy in your platform that's not confusing, there's lots of ways that like really smart people can make that happen where it's a much more seamless experience from the get-go. But like, I don't care how amazing your product copy is. It is especially if you have a product that's going to serve like general end users, where it could be anyone from, and I love to think of specific people when I'm writing, right? So I'm thinking of like the developers that I know at my company or might be reading this, but also my English teacher who refuses to get a smartphone from high school, like stuff like you've got this spectrum.
It has to be accessible, and it
right.
has to be
so,
at different levels.
Right. Different people want more support sometimes too. And so it's like, that's great that you invested in it, but you still need support content. You still need a help center. I don't care who you are. You need some kind of help center that your users can access, because they are going to Google things. They're going to try and figure out the answers. And so it's better for you to have something, ideally something that's good, even if it's not much, having something that's accurate, that's structured, that's findable, all of those things. I could go on and on and on, but to me, that's where there is that significance of like, you need to make sure that you're meeting all the demographics that your platform is intended to serve. Because not everyone thinks like you and your product team, and that's a good thing. But, we have to meet people where they are and kind of prepare for that, the progressive disclosure of information, where it's not overwhelming the people who know a lot, but also it's really easy to find more if people wanted more.
And Maring, speaking of that, where can people find you if they want to learn more?
So I'm on LinkedIn, right? Like everyone. I haven't been posting as much as I would like to, but I'm hoping to work on that. And I have a project in the works that I've started for myself, because I'm kind of launching back right into the consulting stuff. But I really like sharing information and talking about it. And I love hearing from people too about how it may or may not work for you. But I just started in partnership with Knowledge Owl, the helpcenterhelper.com, or just helpcenterhelper.com. It's just a landing page right now, but I'm working on putting some templates and guidelines for different article types, things like that. The idea is to make a help center for people who are writing help centers, regardless of what you need. And it's going to take time to develop, but it's a goal. But most significantly, the course that I wrote with UX Content Collective, it's uxcontent.com is their website, but we'll do a link right directly to the course.
We'll have a QR code up right now.
Yeah, so the course is called Fundamentals of Support Content, and it goes through, so there's 6 units, and it goes through kind of the background and like how support content might currently exist in your organization and how you can kind of work with that. The second unit is a lot about content strategy, working with stakeholders. There's a whole lesson I insisted on having about working with a support team, knowing that like if non-support people take this course, like this is how you work with a support team and why that's really important. And then we get into structure, which gets a lot into like simple ways to optimize for AI and different ways of thinking about it. I'm a huge fan and nerd about style guidelines, so there's a lot in there about that. I've got a style guideline template in there too that people can use where it's a nice starting point. And then we get into article types, we get into maintenance as well as deployment. I remember doing a whole lesson to learn the difference between a CCMS and a headless CMS and a CMS and a headless CCMS and all of that stuff. So I found a great visual for that. And we kind of break that down of like what you might need to look for in software and like how to kind of prepare for maybe like you don't have access now, but you might in the future. The idea is to have a really holistic view of the fundamentals of your support content practices. And the last unit is maintenance and figuring out audits and things like that. And I get a little bit into KCS. And there's a certification process that's a part of that. There's unit practices at the end of every unit. So you'll do an exercise that's related to the unit and you'll get feedback on that. It's something we're really proud of. And definitely I had support people in mind, but I kind of like that it's coming from the UX content space because I do think they're a little bit more removed from the whole debate around knowledge management / technical writing / support content.
Wonderful. And finally, folks, if you're free UK time in the morning on November 25th, I'm part of a webinar with NICE where we're talking about knowledge and being the foundation of everything and how it pulls through into the agent experience as well. So we'll put that link in the show notes as well. But Maring, thank you very, very much for joining my favorite customer experience.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's always fun to talk about this stuff.
Thanks for listening, folks. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you for listening to My Favorite CX. Your listenership is important to us. On your keypad, please press a number between 1 and 5 to rank how much you've enjoyed your experience.